Hey, welcome back. Part 3 in the bookcase build. We're going to cut the male part of the sliding dovetails and use the LR32 system so we can position the adjustable shelves. If that sounds interesting, stick around. I've cut the end panels and the internal panels down to dimensions, and I've routed the back channel on the end panels exactly the same way that we did for the top and the base that we saw in the last episode. The dimensions are slightly different than I showed in version 1 of the plans, and I recorded a short video as I was cutting the panels to explain why. Let's check that out. These are the panels that we're cutting, the end panels and the 3 internal panels, and I just want to revisit the sizes we've got on the design. We know that we're going to put some holes in here for the shelves and also for the door hinges, and we know we're going to use the LR32 system to do that. We've seen in previous videos that LR32 works best when this is a multiple of 32 millimeters. That way we can set the rail up once and we can reuse it many times across here to get repeatable cuts. If we divided 1154 by 32, we end up with 36.06. So if we multiply 36 by 32, the nearest whole number, that distance there should actually be 1152. And if we cut our panels to 1152, then the LR32 system will come into its own and give us repeatability. However, we know that on these internal panels we've also got a 6mm dovetail, and we didn't know when we made this the size of dovetail we're going to use, and now we decided it was 6mm. So I now need to add 12mm, 6 plus 6, to that dimension. So 1152 plus 12 equals 1164. And if we divide 1164 by 32, we end up with 36.37, or 36.38. So I'm going to round that one up to 37. 32 millimeters on the LR32 system, time the nearest whole number above the final distance that I want is 37, and 32 times 37 is going to equal 1184. So we're going to cut all our panels to 1184, not 1154. Now that simply allows me to put consistent holes on all these panels using the LR32 system, so all my shelves will line up and all my door hinges will line up, and that just makes life a little bit easier for us. The second thing is I want to look at the depth of these panels. Now the end panels have got to be exactly the same as the top and the base. We know the top and the base was 265, so the end panels I'm going to cut at 1184 by 265, and that's okay, and that will give us what we need. The internal panels, however, are also going to be cut to 1184, but that 265 is incorrect, and it's incorrect because we have put a 15mm rebate on the back of the end panels and the top and the bottom panels. So these want to be 265 minus that 15mm so that they are flush with the back. So 265 minus 15 is 250, so my internal panels are going to be 250mm on my cut list. The internal panels will end up 12mm too long because there's no dovetail on this end panel here, but that's okay because once we've got all the holes cut and all the joinery cut, I can trim those down by 6mm at either end, and that will guarantee that when I put the case together, all of the various holes will all line up for the internal shelves and for the door units. However, this 250 measurement here on the internal panels looks good on paper, but in reality when we're actually cutting things at 265, yes we used the rails, and yes we took our time to measure it up, and yes we thought through how we were going to move the route a bit back to give me the recess. There's no guarantee I've ended up with a perfect 250 on this top base between the inside of the recess and the edge of the board. So I'm going to take the parallel rails and I'm going to take that measurement from the boards we've already cut and set the parallel rails to whatever that distance is. And that will guarantee that when I put this thing together, not only will the front line up, but the back edge of this will line up to the inside edge of the 15mm rebate. So this is the distance I'm talking about from the front of the board to that rebate at the end. And now I line up my cutting edge on my guide rail with the inside of that rebate. And now I can just set these up against the edge of my board, and that locks in that distance for me. So I've now allowed for any errors I made when I cut this board, and I know my internal panels will be flush at the front and flush on that rebate at the side. And with that established, I can now go ahead and batch out all my internal panels. Okay, so the next step is I now want to use the LR32 system to cut the holes, and that's the first part of the joinery I want to do on these panels. If you're not familiar with the LR32, check out the video that we went through showing how to use that and set it up. I want to use the LR32 rail to make a story stick so I understand where I want to cut my holes. Let's have a look at that. So this is all set up ready for use. I've set a distance of 37 millimeters from the front edge, and that's the standard distance that you use on the Euro hinges, and that's what we're going to use to fix the doors. So we'll make all our front row of holes and our back row of holes 37 millimeters. I've got my end stops in place here, so this will now be repeatable on all my panels. I now want to use this as a story stick so we can work out where we cut the holes. I want to use a story stick to show me the positions of these shelves on the end panel, and that will be the same for all the internal panels as well, because we've set up the LR32 rail to allow for that repeatability. Once I know that, I know I want a series of holes here and here in the midpoint of these panels, so that will allow me to identify the holes I want to use on the LR32 system. So we know that this is 160 millimeters from the end panel, and we know that this is 18 millimeters thick, so that first measurement I'm interested in is 178 millimeters. That's the inside of that shelf there from the base of my panel. The second distance I'm interested in is 479 millimeters up from 178, or 479 plus 178 to the end of the panel, and that will give me the inside edge of this one. That figure is 657 millimeters. I now know that the top of this panel is 657 plus 18 equaling 675 millimeters. And then I'm back to the top of my panel. So I can lay out now on my LR32 these measurements, and that will give me a story stick so I understand where these shelves will fit in relationship to the panel. My first measurement is 178 millimeters, which is there. My second measurement is 657 millimeters, which is there. And my third measurement is 675 millimeters, which is there, and then at the top of my panel. So now I can clearly see that this is my bottom opening, that's my middle shelf, and this here is my top opening. So I want to choose the holes that are in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is that hole. So I want to use that hole and that hole and that hole for my shelf. Makes sense? On this one, my middle hole is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is that one. So I want that one, and that one for my middle shelf there. So when I use my rail, I can clearly see I just drill those 3 holes out, and that's going to give me the perfect position on these boards. Now I also know that my doors are going to come from round about this top part to this bottom part. There will be a slight overlap, but that's good enough for now. My Euro door hinges work on 32mm centres as well. So we're going to put a door hinge probably round about there, and a door hinge around about there. So I now know where my door hinges are going to go. Now I don't need door hinges on every single panel, just the end panels. So I'm also going to put a little indicator through that so I know that I'm not drilling those holes and not to get myself confused. This is an internal panel. I want to drill all the way through, so I've got my router set up with the appropriate bit from the 32mm kit, and I can just go ahead and drill 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in all my internal panels. For the end panels, I don't want to plunge all the way through. I want to go down to round about 10mm. The bit that we have in the router at the moment is the one that takes us all the way through. So we're going to change that for the bit that's designed to do a blind cut. From the front face, the drill pattern is exactly the same, plus the door hinges. So we can reuse the LR32 system using exactly the same layout as we did before, but now I'm going to use these two, so I need to drop off the end clamps and just clamp this to my wood. Now this time I can't simply flip the board over because that would then be cutting into the wrong side. So we'll drill this series of holes in the other end piece, and then we'll reset the rail to make the holes from the back. I've turned the panel over, and now I'm going to work from this side of the rebate here. Not the edge of the board, the inside of the rebate. And I want my series of holes 35mm back from the rebate edge, and that will balance the board up. I only care about these sets of holes, the sets of 3. I don't care about the hinge holes because there's no hinges on the back of the board. So to identify the holes that I need on my rail, I line this up in position using my 2 reference stops, and I'm just going to move that until the holes show through the LR32, like so. And all I've done there is I've now drawn 3 sets of lines, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and that identifies the holes I now need to do in the rail when I'm working from this other edge. And I've just put a 0 next to each of the ones I want to use so I don't get confused with any other markings on the board. With that done, we line up from this edge, same 35mm in, cut those in both panels, job's done. So we're making progress. That's all the holes now cut in all the panels. Now I want to turn our attention to the dovetail on the end of each panel. So these are the joints that we're interested in. It's the dovetails on the end of the 3 internal panels. Remember, these are domino joints reinforced with pocket hole screws, so we're not interested in the end panels. It's these 6 joints on these 3 internal panels. So the first thing we need to do is to take some measurements. This is obviously a rough diagram. This is our board, and on the end of the board we are going to cut that dovetail. So we need to understand how deep do we need it and how wide do we need it. We'll use a digital height gauge to give us this depth here. Simply put it over, unlock it, slide it down, and that's coming in at 5.69 on that piece. I've got 5.77 there, and I've got 5.8 there. So we will make our first test cut at round about 5.6mm. Now the reason I'm not going to go straight in with the 5.8 or the 6mm is I want to creep up on it. So we know that this is going to be a bit short, so we'll cut a test piece on a convenient piece of scrap. We'll then test that fit into our groove, and then we'll adjust accordingly. So in terms of this width, we'll come with our calipers and we'll just measure across the base of this board. So we'll start off here coming in at 17mm. We know that our board is 18mm wide, so I want to take off each side 0.5mm. 0.5 plus 0.5 is 1. 18 minus 1 is the 17. So we'll set up the router table for a depth of 5.6mm and a cut of 0.5mm, and then we'll cut it on one side, flip the board over, cut the other side, and that should do. But we'll do this on a scrap piece of board first of all. I've got the router table set up. I've got the bit installed already. It's the same bit we were looking at before. I've got the Incra Super fence on, and all this is leveled off, and I've got the top support fence as well. Job one is I want to set the height of the router bit to give me that 5.6mm cut. I'm going to wind that down so it's gone out the table. This is zeroed. I'm going to set that there on the high point of the router bit and just move this up till I get to that 5.6mm depth, and that will do. That's 5.59, 5.58, so that's good enough on the scale. With this set to the right height, I now want to set it for a 0.5mm cut. So I rest my steel ruler against that widest cutting part of the router bit, and I bring my Incra Fence up till it's resting against my ruler. That is now zeroed in, and I lock the fence down and put it into the incremental adjustment position. If you've seen the Incra LS position of fence series, you'll know that every click on my incremental adjuster is 0.05mm. So if I want to wind this back by 0.5mm, I want 10 clicks on my dial. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That is now going to give me a 0.5mm cut, which is very, very shallow on this fence. That's okay, we know that 0.5mm is probably too little, but I want to test this first of all for the depth cut. We'll get the depth right and then we'll get the final width right, but for now that's good enough. I'm coming in with a rubber faced pad. This actually came with the Incra Fence, and I'm pushing the base of that into the fence, and then I'll slide this across the cutter and we make the cut. I'll turn it over and we'll do the same. And that gives us, can you see that, a very shallow dovetail that we now want to test in our board. Just before we do the test fit, notice here I'm working from the back of the sliding dovetail. You may be tempted to work from the front and try and slide your piece in this for the test fit. As you're putting your piece of material into this dovetail for a test fit, we know it's going to be tight initially. And what happens is the grains in the wood reorientate from being parallel to being compressed in that sort of direction. As you take the wood out, they straighten up and then they turn into this direction as you pull the wood out. That tends to take this very, very end point of your sliding dovetail and weaken it because you've bent it in and now you've bent it back. And this, you'll see, this starts to split down the end if you're not careful. At the back, that's okay because we're going to put a panel on this, so if that does happen, that's not the end of the world. On the front, you're going to see it. So when you're doing your test fits, always test it from, if you can, the blind side of the joint where it's not going to be seen. When we assemble it, we bring it in this direction because we want those fibres to be compressed, orientated to the board. So a bit of a tip, always do your testing from the back of the joint. All I want to do now is to test this for depth. So I'm going to rest this very, very corner piece here towards the middle of that and just sort of pivot it around a little bit, and all I'm looking for is the depth, and I can see that depth is actually pretty good. In fact, it's pretty much spot on. So from a depth point of view, we're probably good. I'm not sure if you can just see that the shoulder, the very shallow shoulder there, is resting on the top of the wood, and that's what I'm looking for. In terms of width, it's way too wide. So we'll now reduce the thickness of this by using the incremental adjuster, and we'll probably take the fence back a further 0.4mm or 8 clicks of the dial. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Lock it down. Then we'll repeat the cut. And now we do another test fit. And that's sliding in, it's very loose. and that difference between not fitting before and now where it's fitting was 0.4 of a millimetre. So you can see there's a gap here and there's a gap there, but the depth is actually pretty good. So we need to adjust this a little bit more because I'm not happy with the size of those gaps there at the edge. So we'll now move the fence back by 4 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we try another test fit. Oh, that's good. Now this is beginning to tighten up as I get into the joint, and that's all that resistance in the joint coming together, and that's a lot better, and it's looking like a really tight joint, but if anything it's still slightly too fat. I'm going to adjust this by only 2 clicks. That's 0.1 of a millimetre. 1, 2. Sliding in quite easy. Get a little bit tight now. I can still push it in by hand, and oops, gone a bit too far. So you can see that is now a really strong joint. It's not loose, and what will happen here is as we put the glue on the joint, this will expand ever so slightly. Not a lot, but a little bit, and that will just give me a really nice tight joint, and I'm really pleased with that. We're going to cut all our panels to that width, which is now set up on the router table. Now obviously these panels are somewhat bigger than our test panel, which is why I've put this piece on here. This has got a lip on the back. I'm going to use the same technique with our red push stick, pushing the base into the fence. This top piece here, I'm going to grip the board with my fingers resting on this lip and my thumb pressing there. So I've got 2 points of contact. So this rail here and the base here. That means I'm going to be in control of the board at all times. And when it all comes together, you should end up with something like this. All the joints are reasonably tight, they all look nice, everything's flush, everything's lined up at the back, everything lines up at the front, it's self-supporting, and it's reasonably square, that it is. So that's it for today. I'm going to go ahead and cut the sliding dovetails for the drawer dividers and for the middle shelves, and when we come back together we'll look at measuring up and cutting the end panels, and measuring up and cutting and putting the dovetails on the dividing shelves. See you next time.